Welcome to the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. I'm thrilled you're here. My name is Jason Elkins, and in addition to being your host, I'm also a former U.S. Army paratrooper, third-generation commercial hot air balloon pilot, paramotor pilot, ex-Montana fly fishing guide, advanced open water scuba diver, and a full-time nomad that's visited more than 30 countries on 6 continents. As a seasoned adventure travel expert with a passion for creating and sharing meaningful experiences, I'm on a quest to impact the lives of adventure travelers, the tour operators they rely on, and the communities that host them. Every week, I bring you exclusive interviews with fascinating adventure tourism experts who have agreed to share their personal stories, favorite destinations, and some invaluable travel insights they've picked up along the way. We'll enjoy a casual conversation, create some connections, and likely share some laughs. It's my hope that by the end of each episode, this big world will feel just a bit smaller. Let's get started, shall we? Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Big World Made Small podcast for the adventure traveler. This is a really cool one for me today because I'm speaking with someone that I've both met personally and I've actually been to the lodge that she's involved in. I'm not sure if I should even call it a lodge because it's so much more than that. But today we've got Maria Samper. She is a co-owner at Calanoa, Amazonas. Did I say all that right, Maria?
Yeah, perfect. Calanoa, Amazonas. Thank you, Jason. Right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, super excited. I actually was at Calanoa, I guess it was probably about a month and a half ago, and just absolutely fell in love with it. And then I had the opportunity to meet you a few days later in another place. Mm-hmm. And had a great conversation with you and your mother. And it was, frankly, quite emotional conversation, as I recall.
Yeah.
It ended with
it ended up in tears.
Yeah, it ended up in tears and hugs. And it was just a beautiful moment. And I was like, I have to have you on the show. So thank you so much. We are going to discuss Calanoa a bit. We're definitely going to discuss your family. And before we get too much into what Calanoa is, I'm sure you have a better way of describing it than I would ever describe it. But before we get to that, I really kind of want to know more about you. I want to kind of get a feel for how did you end up sitting across from me at a travel trade show, a month or so ago. And so how far do you think we need to go back for our listeners to kind of understand your journey?
Oh, yeah. Well, yes. Well, I was born in Colombia, that wonderful country that, it's a very powerful, beautiful, intense, so diverse and just full of creativity and amazing people. So I was privileged to have, I was born there and it's an honor for me. So that's where everything started, where we were born. And
very cool. Were your parents from Colombia as well?
Yes.
Or okay.
They
right.
both are Colombian, yes. So my parents were always in love with the Amazon. And with native communities in Colombia. They worked in Colombia all their lives in rural areas and with different native communities. So growing up, I was always in the jungle, in the river, walking, hiking all over the country, from the Amazon to the deserts to from the coffee growing areas to the plains. So from a very young age, I was exposed to nature. And of course, that marks you. That makes you different because I think when you're in nature, your senses really heighten. Your senses are so open and your heart really opens to the experience of being here in this planet. So I had that wonderful and so grateful for that because my parents really took us deep into the jungle and we experienced not only the beauty of nature but also how the people who take care of it see this world, which is very different to how we see it. They see it in complete connection to its magic and its wisdom, and we see it differently. There's this disconnection in this system that's shaping our routines, shaping our thoughts, and shaping how we act. So I think that that was installed in my soul and DNA and every part of me, and that made me an adventurer.
I suspect that our listeners can hear it in your voice, and
I have the opportunity to see your face as we're having this conversation, and I can see it in your soul. I can just see the way that your face is so lit up. This is something that's in you. You didn't have to think about that answer. That just came out because it's in you. And I'm super curious about, I heard you say, your parents were working with the indigenous and local peoples across different parts of Colombia, and you were able to be introduced to that and experience that as you were growing up. And I think myself and maybe our listeners are wondering, like, well, how would you describe, like, what work were they doing? Like, what type, was that a career that brought them into this? Or how did they get into that?
Well, I think for my father it really was his, like, a soul journey. He was very young when he arrived in an island in the middle of a river called the Apaporis River. He had just finished high school. He did go to university to study biology and anthropology, but in the middle of the career of his university years, he went for 2 years to live completely alone in an island in the Amazon in a trip of self-discovery. He was completely alone, and he fished. He built his house. It was really spectacular and very special, and that's why he's so connected to the land. Every now and then he would have contact with a community nearby, but every now and then, every few months. So it was really very instinctive for him to do his self-discovery, his soul journey to find this. And then his connection, it's always been from that moment to the land. And then he met my mom, she's always been more into environmental education. And they started many different projects. A lot had to do with art, photography. My father is a photographer. So they did lots of publications around nature and cultures. They have over 33 books published with photography and investigation from different well-known scientists in Colombia. So a lot was through photography and books, but also working with the communities. It was more like handcrafts and recovery of ancestral traditions on how to grow food differently, or not differently, remembering the traditions and bringing that alive again, which is what Calanoa is today, is the dignification of traditional processes of ancestral traditions to protect the land and the culture.
Wow.
So that's how they started.
Many questions.
It was been a work of 40 years that they were completely devoted. And then Calanoa was the result of all these years.
I don't know if you know the answer or if this is even a conversation I should be having, but I'm curious. I almost can't not ask when you say he went and lived on an island in the Amazon River for 2 years with almost no contact. I can't imagine how we can continue without me asking, what was that about? I mean, what happened in his childhood that would cause that? Because that's not something everybody does. Do you know?
No, I know what happened in his childhood. He had just an amazing family. My grandparents were just amazing. Really, my grandfather is a very well-known architect in Colombia. His work is just spectacular. And the family was always really connected to social causes, just helping a lot in terms of architecture for the people who wouldn't have access to beauty somehow. They would provide just beautiful spaces in the city. They're well known for that. But I think it was more like an uncle or someone in the family who had a farm in the Colombian plain areas, like in the savannah. And every holiday they would go there. And then my father got really into nature that way. It was more like an uncle or someone who had that farm, and that he was just amazed, and he was like, "I have to follow this." Yeah.
Wow, he sounds I don't know much about Henry David Thoreau, but your dad sounds kind of like the Henry David Thoreau of
Yeah.
Colombia. And
Yeah, that's true.
that's very, very cool story that I did not know.
Yeah.
I did not hear that when I was at Calanoa. I didn't hear it from you before.
Yeah.
And I'm happy we got back to that point to kind of help understand.
Yeah, and my mom too, with her commitment to environmental education. She's in a way always educating. It's like telling people this is what nature is asking us to do again. Connect to nature again. And why is it so important? Because it's actually the only thing that we actually have
Yeah.
is this planet, this beautiful planet. And we can make it smaller in our
Yeah.
hearts. And,
Big world, make it feel a little bit smaller. That's
yes,
why
we
we're here
can. I
today.
love that. I love that title because it totally makes sense. We can totally make it small in our hearts and change this planet. And I think it's asking us to do that, to connect again.
I think when we connect with different cultures, different people, nature, for me, that's what travel is about, is connection. I can't see any reason I would want to travel if I wasn't connecting with something. It seems like it'd be a total waste of time, but that's what I enjoy about it, is that connection. And I feel in my experience anyway, as I've traveled, the world just feels smaller. The more connections I make, the smaller and less overwhelming things feel. And it's a little bit more, I don't know. So,
and the trip is really within also.
Yes.
It's within. Because as you travel and you get out of your comfort zone, there's a whole bunch of limiting beliefs. Yeah, you learn a lot about yourself. And that's so beautiful. And when you do it in nature, then you remember that you're human. And then you came here to be, not do a lot. It's okay to be completely in another time, in another space. And you're there with you and just enjoying whatever your soul tells you. It's a lot of freedom and power, I think, in traveling.
Right. And it's so interesting because we all have our own kind of what it means to us. And I think we could look at your father's example, the connection. He's there pretty much by himself. But over that course of 2 years, I can imagine maybe the connections with nature, the connections with self, the connections. I mean, he was almost traveling without traveling, right? In a sense, he's creating those connections. And I'm super curious because I'm imagining all these scenarios. Like you mentioned that he met your mom. Was this after he left the island and wasn't really communicating much with people? I want to know more about that story because I'm imagining she runs into him out on this island in the Amazon and he's like living in a little shack or something on the island. And I'm thinking, and she's looking at him thinking, oh man, he's a great catch. So tell us more about how that happened.
How they met. Yeah, I think, my father, he is, of course, you can imagine after that experience, it's 2 years of getting to know yourself, all your fears and your strengths. And, I have to fish to eat and I have to, sometimes he says that sometimes he didn't know if he was dreaming or awake. That fine line when you're completely alone. You do get validated by others, but when you're completely alone, you're like, am I dreaming? So he lives in it's like a parallel timeline in a way, my dad. That's very creative, very, very magical, and very almost invisible, how he shapes things that then come to be. My mom she's this very active and like a visionary. She's this plain, this plain, and she moves and she's an amazing leader. So they complement really, really well. It's like more in the ethereal planes, and she's in this plane creating and talking to people, and all the institutions that work in the Amazon and the governments, and how she deals with the communities and the shamans and their leaders to create. So I think it's just a perfect match. But yeah, after those 2 years in the Amazon, my mom was actually leading an expedition to Chocó, which is like the rainforest in the Pacific in Colombia, and he was part of the team. my dad. He was part of the team doing all the photography. So, and that's how they met. And I guess they yeah.
Very cool.
They continued. Yes.
So now fast forward a little bit, and they have you. Do you have any siblings?
I have
any brothers and sisters?
Younger sister. Yes.
A younger sister. So describe what that you mentioned. You already mentioned that you were out, going to a lot of places, meeting a lot of people, being exposed to a lot of things. I'd like to learn a little bit more about that. Specifically, I'm curious if you ever had a traditional, what we might call a traditional schooling experience, and how did you interact with the other kids? Because your parents sound a little different.
Yes, they're yes, and that was interesting because I arrived. I was born in Bogota, my sister as well. When I was 4, my sister was only 1 year old. We went back to the Amazon, to the Caquetá region, border with Brazil, which is a bit northern from Calanoa. And we were there for 4 years. So like my early childhood, my sisters as well, we spent there, and that gave us a lot of different values. And
do you I was going to ask you if you remember your first memory, but if you remember it, then of course if it's your first memory, you remember it. Okay. So tell us your first memory, if you'd like. Cause because a lot of us experience things that we don't remember until we get to the age around 3, 4, 5 or something. And here you are in the Amazon when your memories start to carry them. So do you remember your first memory?
Yes, I remember everything. Well, not everything. Wow. I remember because we had a little farm with chickens and rabbits, and of course, I remember all those animals.
Okay,
had to feed them and that. But I guess the most beautiful memory, and I tell this to my children. I would go to school every day in a canoe in the river. Okay. My dad would take me in a canoe to school in a little town called La Pedrera, and then. Yeah, that was pretty amazing. I didn't have to take the boat at like 5:30 in the morning, and just being in that canoe every morning was so special and magical. Of course, I was when we left when I was 8. We went back to Bogota. I was in shock for a long time.
Yeah,
and of course, I never felt I could quite fit in a very conservative Andean city. So big, but I've always been very creative. I like singing too, and sculpting and all that. And I think that's how I coped. I always sang in choirs, and that was really nice because there was like a different sensitivity there. And of course, we traveled a lot. But of course, at school, I was lucky. That was hard for many, many years. But those hard moments help us remember how strong we are.
Yeah, I can imagine, because it's a challenge. A lot of the people that I've spoken with on this podcast, and just a lot of the people that I've interacted with in this business, are cut from a different bolt of fabric. We're just a little different, and we've got that wanderlust, or that desire to experience and connect that. Sometimes when you're in a school environment, not everybody around you has that same curiosity and that same sensitivities or whatever you want to call it. So I can imagine. I had some experience.
And I think it got to the point when I was 17, and my sister 15, where we couldn't really travel anymore in the rural areas in Colombia, because it was a very difficult moment, the 80s in Colombia, with all the war, which never got to the Amazon. So the people there are quite different. They didn't live through war like the rest of many Colombians.
Help us, if you don't mind, help us understand that, because most of the people listening to this don't really know much about the history of Colombia. So why was the Amazon region not impacted?
Yeah, during the 80s, with all the drug cartels and guerrillas and everything, it just became very difficult to live in Colombia. There were a lot of economic interests and war and corruption, all those. Yeah, it was an awful moment. Thankfully, Colombians' creativity, that's helped a lot to change that. But Yes, it didn't get to the Amazon because there were many economic interests there. Some areas in the Amazon were worked more as labs for processing, but it wasn't considered like a wealthy region or with economic interests. So it didn't draw the drug cartels or the guerrilla groups to that area.
Well, and I would imagine also that just logistically, it's probably not a great
Yeah,
transportation
we
hub.
don't
It's
even
still
have
not easy to
access.
get to.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
still
not
not that easy. I mean,
access.
there's, yeah.
Yeah, and being
Okay.
on a border too, I think there was more government presence. But yeah, so it got to the point where we were growing up, and my parents wanted to be in a place where it would feel more free, and we moved to Canada, the whole family.
Did you
And
say
for a
Canada?
second, Canada, British
Okay.
Columbia.
All right. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, so that's also home for us. I did my university years there. My sister got married to a Canadian. My parents have a home there, and we love it too.
I'm
And that
curious,
moment,
because I'm envisioning maybe the people in Canada, they see you show up, a teenager with the experiences that you've had and that connection to nature and all this stuff. You were probably more, I don't want to put any words in your mouth, but I could just imagine a different reception there than what you'd get in Bogota. I wasn't around Bogota,
yeah, I
during
think
that
it
time,
was
but
for me. I was studying international relations, but for me, I went to the University of British Columbia, which has an amazing the Museum of Anthropology is one of my favorite museums in the entire world.
okay.
And I got a job there a week after we arrived in Canada.
Nice.
And that was amazing. I was working with indigenous communities from BC and Canada all the time. I was like, okay, I've been taken care of. It was beautiful. I just loved working there. I felt like I gave just some continuity during my childhood and all those years in Colombia. And yes, that was very nice. And I think for us, being in nature still, being in such a beautiful part of Canada in nature was really nice. But my parents still working for Colombian for Colombia. They just gave us this space of freedom, given the situation in Colombia. And as soon as the things got better in Colombia, they went back and built Calanoa. And me, I've lived in, after Canada, I've lived in 12 countries after.
Wow.
I work as a
Okay.
humanitarian. So I moved a lot. I've moved a lot.
Were you working for the same organization during most of these moves? Is that?
I work for the United Nations in different
I thought it might have been
agencies.
something like that. Yeah. Okay.
And NGOs. My husband too. When my children were born, I just devoted my time to Calanoa, to the foundation, and to that because I couldn't travel as much. So now, yes.
Well,
So now we're in Panama.
before we jump into Calanoa, doing these travels and living in all these different places, doing the humanitarian work, were there any? I'm sure there are tons of memories and tons of experiences, but I'm curious: was there anything that you feel like really changed the direction of your life enough that you'd like to discuss that now before we continue on discussing Calanoa?
The thing that changed the direction of my life.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's, a place that you lived or an experience that you had that was just a real aha moment that impacted the rest of your life, or was it just every place was impactful? Because I'm sure they were.
Every place, and like every place, I don't know, like life was taking me so many places, and I was like, why am I here? And then after a while, I was like, okay, I understand why. And every place, because when you move a lot, you realize that you think there's continuity, and yes, you are loyal to your soul and like being creative or being in nature or trying to connect with certain things that you love. So that's continuous. But what worked in one country never works in the following country. So if you are doing this beautiful project in one country and you want to somehow recreate it in the following, that's not going to happen. You're there for something else.
That's actually a really that's a really useful insight. Yeah, because I think what you're mentioning there is really insightful, because I've lived in other places, I've traveled, and like you said, what works in one place doesn't necessarily work in another place. And if you can step into the perspective of the locals that live there, and all of a sudden someone shows up that looks different, that has some uniform or some organization behind them or whatever, and they show up and say, no, we should do it this way because this is how it works. This is the way it's supposed to be done. And they're just, the people who live there half the time probably just rolling their eyes and thinking, oh, geez, here's another person from outside coming in to try and tell us how to do things. And we've already tried 50 different ways. And so that's an interesting thing that I'm sure that experience must have come in very, very handy, as you started to work more with Calanoa, because you've got a similar situation. Even though you're Colombian, I'm sure that's a challenge. Would you say, or what do you think?
Well, first, in my experience working with communities with the United Nations and NGOs, they would always send me to the field. I was Maria Goes. And of course, I was very happy because that's what I liked. But it was mainly because, and I asked the boss once, why do you always send me? There's other people who could go. And he said, because you're not intimidating.
Oh.
And I was like, should I take that? And then he said, yes, people want to talk to you. They're okay. If I send other type of person, it's like the people are going to say what that person what they think that person wants to hear, or they won't even say, or they would maybe talk in terms of, but not open up to how they really feel. In some communities, I remember in Philippines, a man comes and he approaches and he said, do you think that the help that you're giving us is solving the situation? Is that, of course not. We are in charge. What you give us is a little bit of something just to get us, just to help us a little, but it won't make it a difference. We are the ones who make the difference. I'm like, yes, thank you for letting me know. Maybe they wouldn't have said that to another person, to a donor.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah.
And I love that I have, of course, and I think that gave me those first years in the Amazon is that openness of a spirit where people feel okay to say, this is how I feel. And your presence here couldn't, it won't make a huge difference. Thank you. But we're in touch. And I love that.
I see that about you. And it reminds me of when when we started the show, we mentioned something about, when I met you and your mom, and there were tears flowing and emotions, and the two of you are just so easy to connect with. I mean, we had 15 minutes sitting at a table in a convention center type of place. I shouldn't say that because it was smaller than that, but you're both very easy to connect with. And I can see that. And I can compare that to, maybe when I was managing a place in Central America, quite often I'd go find the staff and I'd say, okay, well, we need to do this, and here, this is how we're going to do it. And they're all like, yep, okay, sure, whatever. Then as soon as I walk around the corner, they're right back to doing it the way they were. And that's fine. I get that. But they would not just say, Jason, that's not going to work. And this is why. They would just sit there and shake their head. Like I would say, go get the tractor. We need to go get the tractor and do this and this and that. And they're like, okay, great. Yep, we're going to do that right now, which in Latin culture and a lot of places I've been, right now means tomorrow, especially in Belize. And later on, like the tractor was still sitting in the shed and they hadn't done anything. I was like, what's going on? Well, the tractor's broken. Well, when did it get broken? 3 days ago. Well, this afternoon when we were talking about using the tractor to do this project, why didn't anybody say anything? They knew it was broken. They knew that they weren't going to use the tractor, but they weren't going to say, Jason, we're not going to use the tractor. The tractor's broken. So anyway, that's I off on a tangent. So you've got that skill set and that openness. And now let's jump into how that's been useful at Calanoa. because your
Yes.
staff are you've got a lot of indigenous staff or people from the area.
I think I'll give the biggest credit to my parents. They've just they've been there for 40 years, and they've been slowly weaving all those connections. They've been slowly letting people know that their presence is okay, and that they're not trying to impose or anything. On the contrary, there's always this dialogue and this reverence to their way of living, and the reverence to nature, and how we're the intruders. As human beings, it's like it's so powerful that we are just there trying to adapt, and in a constant dialogue with what they consider is sacred.
Right.
So with that respect to their tradition, their culture, and their wisdom and nature, slowly, but it's been a work of years and years and years. And slowly they said, okay, we will buy this land to protect it. Are you okay with that? Yeah, great. Do you welcome us? Yes. Okay, great. Can we work together? Can we learn from you? And then they see how they benefit, and how they can. I think the beauty of this project and of responsible tourism in general is that it provides income for the communities, an economic source of income that they didn't have before, and that aligns with what they want for their community. They want to protect, they want to provide for their families, and they want to keep their land and their traditions. And responsible tourism says, okay, there's that.
I want to go more into that, because that was something that came up when I was down there on my trip that I would love to hear your thoughts on. And before we go there, for anybody that's listening, I know that you've had this challenge. What I'm going to ask you, I know you've had this challenge before, is how do you describe Calanoa when you don't have the ability to show a photo? You meet someone somewhere and you tell them I'm involved in this, and what is Calanoa is the question. So how do you describe that if it's all you have are the words that you can use?
Well, Calanoa,
because I don't know how I would, to be honest with you.
Calanoa, it's a project of love in the middle of the Amazon, in the heart of, I would say, is the heart of the planet. And when I say it's the heart of the planet, it's because the Amazon is so infinitely generous. Just like the heart in our bodies, every pump of our heart, the heart is empty. Every time it pumps, it's empty, it gives. Mm-hmm. Just like the Amazon. The Amazon holds all this water that benefits all these ecosystems in the Americas and in the world. So it's infinitely generous. So I totally see it as a heart, and a heart is love. So there's a lot of love there. And it's in the middle of the Amazon, like you can point it in the map. It's in the middle of the Amazon. As you say, you have to fly for a while to get there, and then take the river.
I think a lot of people don't realize, if you're not that familiar with Colombia, you don't realize that the Amazon is a big part of this country. You think Amazon, it's immediately Brazil. And if you're a little bit more knowledgeable, you might think, I think part of it maybe is in Ecuador, Peru, or whatever. But I think you really kind of have to know something about Colombia before you realize, this is a big part of it. So tell us, help our listeners understand I don't know if it's percentage of land in Colombia. I don't know how you would describe how much of the Amazon is in Colombia.
Well, we do have the Amazon River in the border with Peru and Brazil. So the Amazon goes by. Not sure the percentage.
But you've got the part, we might say the Amazon meaning kind of the river, but then the Amazonas region of Colombia, it looks like.
I would say it's at least 50% of the country with that.
Yeah,
benefits from this ecosystem and all the rainforest region that goes pretty much half of the country.
It seems like it. It's a much bigger portion of the country than maybe people think of. So I just wanted to put that into perspective a little bit. This is not, Colombia's portion of the Amazon is not a insignificant part of the Amazon basin, because maybe the Amazon River only flows by I don't know if I don't know how many miles. I don't know how long the river flows along the country, but it's obvious. I guess the point is this is the Amazon. So asking you to describe Calanoa is hard to do because it's hard to describe Calanoa without describing the Amazon and everything you just said. And it's like, how do you describe the Amazon to somebody that hasn't experienced it? How do you? And it's almost the same thing with Calanoa.
Yeah. So Calanoa, well, it's a lot, and it's a foundation as well. We work with 5 indigenous communities nearby in the recovery of ancestral traditions, in the dignification of cultural ways to protect the land, in the preservation of the forest, of the river. And there's several projects around that we work with from the school, with the schools, with the local authority, with shamans, with weavers, with potters, lots of art. There's this beautiful project I really like with a community that wanted to pass on the Tikuna language to the children. It was only the elders would speak it. And so we helped them to create a place so they could to teach the language. And they do it through song. They have a choir. And it's just really, really special just to see the choir and how the children sing. And it's just beautiful.
It is. It's yeah, I saw some of that stuff when I was there. I think you'd have to stay a very long time to see all of it. I want to touch on the responsible tourism, because one thing that came up when we were there, and I was there with a group of tour operators and representatives from tour agencies, and the conversation came up about responsible tourism. And part of that was, is it responsible to come into a community and say, look, we're going to bring in business, we're going to bring in tourists so you can stop growing your stuff and just make, do basket weaving classes for our clients, or do, these classes and things for our clients. You don't need to work so hard in the fields anymore. You don't need to work so hard fishing. And then when something happens to the tourism, like happened a few years ago, that can really make a big impact on the community. I'm just curious kind of if you've experienced that there, or what do you think?
Talk about, there are so many things. First, when we talk about responsible tourism, is we take care of the garbage disposal, all that, so 0 plastic in Calanoa. So that's one thing, and the amount of people, there's only 12. We know that 12 people go into the forest a day. Okay. Otherwise, between all the chemicals we use in our bodies and mosquito repellents and everything we do affect, our presence affects the environment. Mm-hmm. So we have to be mindful of all those little details, what materials we use when we build, what's renewable, how are things located in the land so that we don't impact at all. And it's been 14 years where there's no impact in terms of our presence there. So that's one part of our responsibility when we bring tourists. Yes, you can visit, but in this way that's respectful of the environment. So how we manage rubbish, how we plant, so that we cook, so that makes sense. Now, there's the economic component where we do provide funds to the communities. We do rotate our purchase. So we do not always buy things like fruits and vegetables, fish, all the things we buy, and even employment. We don't always benefit one of the communities over the others, or one provider over the other. We rotate so that everyone benefits. We do not impose an activity like you have to teach this or that. If we say we would like to, at the reserve, we would like to teach weaving, would anyone would be interested in teaching or pottery? And then they come and they share with us, but we do not go into the communities hoping that they would just welcome us and maybe change their routines of how they live, but they come and teach. And then, of course, they get paid for that and signifies. And so what what happens behind us is that they want to remember more techniques of weaving. They want to remember more techniques of healing. So things like the mud bath. There's a mud healing bath, the Amazonian spas, we call it. The shamans had lost many of these practices, but now they're curious to recover, to research, to travel deeper in the Amazon to remember. Why? Because the tourists are interested, and not only that, but they've healed people again. So they're proud to bring that back to the community. And of course, it brings another source of income, and it's beautiful and dignifies what they thought they couldn't use anymore. And then also in the protection of the forests, because now, for example, in the Peruvian border, there's Altamira. It was a place that was completely abandoned. They had all kinds of problems with rubbish management. They were just throwing everything to the river. And then Calanoa comes. Well, if you clean these, we'll bring people so that they can see this beautiful ecosystem. And they cleaned it up, and the people visit. And not only that, but they discover this little type of monkey that it only exists in this part of the world, and it's beautiful, and they're preserving it, and they're so proud of it that they can show it. And the whole ecosystem has changed as a result. So that it's like giving this little incentive that creates this huge impact in terms of the recovery of their traditions. But it's not like we impose or give many ideas. We say, look, there's a little bit of interest, and then people who were hunting or who were selling resources like monkeys for laboratories or all kinds of things that were happening before, they don't do it anymore. They rather protect. And so that's cool. The beauty of that.
So how long is Calanoa? I think fair to say it's a tourism business now. Did it start immediately? Was your dad's plan, this is going to be an eco lodge and we're going to bring tourists, or was there a different direction in the beginning? I'm just curious, where did it go into? This is obviously a tourism business.
My dad calls Calanoa as a place of encounter. From the tourism aspect, where people come and connect to land, they have their Amazon experience, but there's a lot of other things happening in Calanoa in terms of encounters. From biologists who come, from musicians. We just had this beautiful wild symphony. It's a concert that my father leads with musicians from all over the world, Asia, Europe, Africa, the Americas, who get together in Calanoa, in that beautiful temple in the middle of the jungle, which I find is spectacular. It's really like a spaceship. And they get together and they create music together with the jungle. And that's quite special. And there's also university students from universities in Canada who use Calanoa as a campus, where they come and learn about architecture and design and nature and biology and indigenous communities. So I think it's not just a place where people pass. I did my Amazon experience, but where people are learning, where people learn about things and they change.
I'm curious, does your dad have do you think he has any emotions around the word tourism? Because almost when I ask that question, I sense like he would be offended if someone said, you've got a tourist lodge in the Amazon. I feel like he'd be like, oh, that's not what it is. But so I'm just curious, does he have negative? Are there some words out there that might commonly be used that he's like, gets all upset about?
No, he wouldn't get upset. He was in the jungle alone for 2 years. He's at a point where nothing upsets him.
Nothing upsets him.
He knows
his zen is he's
understand all the triggers. And of course it is also for tourism, but I think it's more than just
so much more. Yeah.
Yes, although I think the concept of tourism has changed, and you're the expert. People, I think, now not only travel because they want to, put a list of countries, of places they visited. I think they want to travel with a purpose. And so given that, then Calanoa's purpose fits this new way of traveling.
Yeah. It's such an interesting thing. And I've had this conversation with quite a few people around, I think, maybe some of the younger generations are more, they want meaning in what they're doing. But at the same time, there's so many people that are using Instagram, that when you say visit places to get it on their list of places they've been, I think there are, with social media there, I believe there are people that are like, I got to do my Amazon trip. I got to have a picture of me with a monkey.
And bye.
Whatever. Right. And they're maybe going to fly into Letitia or Manaus and go do a day trip or whatever. And then they're on to Italy because they want the picture of the Leaning Tower in their Instagram and this and that. So I think that social media has done that in some ways. But then also the technology is, I think it opens up opportunities for you to connect with people that never would have found Calanoa if it wasn't for social media and marketing. I mean, I do digital marketing for adventure tour operators. I get it. So it's pretty interesting, but I will, and I will say that, I just had an amazing time. I thought it was definitely, you're in the jungle, you're in the Amazon, and the stuff and everything that I saw was, I've been to a lot of places. I've visited a lot of, I guess I don't even want to use the word lodge, but I know we use the word lodge to kind of help describe what it's kind of like, but I've been to many lodges and very few that just seem to blend in so well with the environment and just even the energy level of the people working there. And it was a really special place. So it's been fun for me to have this conversation with you. And I'm curious because we've discussed quite a few things. Is there anything I forgot to ask you, should have asked you, or you want to make sure that our listeners kind of understand about you or Calanoa or the Amazon or life in general before we wrap up?
Well, there's a website, which tells you how to get there, and calanoamazonas.com.
Yep. And we'll have that in the show notes. So anybody that's listening, you don't need to write it down. We'll have a link directly to your website there in the show notes.
And yes, I think what you were saying about just social media just now, of course, we want to visit places and people want to put in social media. It's valid and that's beautiful. I think it's okay. But I think in nature in general, and the Amazon in particular, because of what we talked about, travel changes us in such deep ways. And it reminds us how beautiful being human is and how we are part of this planet and how with our presence you impact the places you visit as well. Yeah, and your visit to the Amazon definitely helps. Everyone who goes to Calanoa visits the Amazon not only takes an experience within, but a lot of that goes to the communities and to the land and protection. So it's a beautiful exchange. Yeah, and
Very, very well said. That's I agree with everything you said. Not that I wouldn't agree. And just a great message to leave. I would definitely urge anybody that's got the Amazon on their list of places they want to go experience. Calanoa would be a great way to do it. I realize not everybody can get that far and make it happen, but it's not that hard. You fly into Letitia. We don't normally talk travel logistics, but you can fly into Letitia. It's not that hard to get there. Get over to a boat and take the boat up the river. Up the river. Yes. And that's part of the experience as well. I remember just when I first got on the boat heading up the river, and it was like, holy cow, I'm on the Amazon River. And it's, what surprised me was it's still so big. It's like, I've been to Manaus. I've been on the Amazon in Manaus, and I was shocked that it was still so big, so far away from Manaus. It's a big river.
It's a big one, yes, kilometers width, and and the thing is, with traveling, we enjoy every, from the moment you leave from one airport and you arrive to your destination. The trip over flying over the Amazon is spectacular.
That's pretty cool too, yeah.
Amazon, you see from Bogota, when you leave the Andes and get into the Amazon, that's really beautiful, overflying. And then the 1.5 hour boat trip to Calanoa in the Amazon River, it's just, it's really
beautiful. See the pink or the great river dolphins, or just the people, just the other boats, and
how the people live along, on the river.
It's super cool. I interviewed somebody the other day. I'm not going to mention any names, but I'd asked him, do you is it all about the destination or the journey? And he surprised me. He's like, no, it's the destination. I don't like traveling. I just want to be there and I want to get there. And I'm like, okay, I respect that. And he's traveled a lot. He's, anybody that's listening to these episodes can probably figure it out. He was a travel blogger. He worked in this business for a long time. And, and I was surprised because he's just like, no, if I want to go to, I'm just going to Angkor Wat in Cambodia. I just want to get there. Like if I could, zoom myself there in one of those Star Trek things. And I'm like, it was just interesting because I'm like, oh, wow, I'm so different at this point. That might change. But at this point, I got to experience everything along the way. Maybe not every part of flying. I'll get, maybe not. Maybe I'd rather take a train or a motorcycle or a bus just because I can experience more as I go. And I suspect you're kind of similar maybe to me in that sense. For me, it's all about the journey.
And just be in the present moment, right? That's
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Maria, thank you so much. Wonderful conversation. I suspect we'll be collaborating on some projects. We're already collaborating on some projects. And I look forward to doing more of that. And thank you so much for joining the show and sharing your time with our listeners and your story. It was very, very cool.
Thank you for
Thanks, Maria.
Thank you.
I trust you enjoyed listening to the conversation as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you're enjoying the Big World Made Small podcast, please take a moment to tell the algorithm by subscribing and posting a review so that others can benefit as well. I also invite you to take a quick trip over to bigworldmadesmall.com and join our private adventure travel community to receive new episode notifications, special access to our guest experts, and perhaps even some exclusive partner offers that we haven't discussed on the podcast. I'll publish another episode soon. Until then, keep exploring. It's the best way to make a big world feel just a bit smaller.